I thought it was just a little dizziness, just a warm afternoon at the park. But seconds later, I was on the ground, strangers screaming, and a paramedic cutting my watch off my wrist. When I woke up in the hospital, the doctor asked me one question that changed everything. How long has this been going on? The terrifying part? Someone I loved already knew the answer. Before I begin, if you've ever lived through a moment that changed your life without warning, please like, leave a comment, and subscribe to my YouTube. It was supposed to be an ordinary Sunday, the kind that feels soft around the edges. The sky was pale blue, stretched wide like it had nowhere else to be, and the park smelled faintly of fresh-cut grass and kettle corn drifting from a vendor cart near the playground. I remember thinking how peaceful everything felt. Children were laughing somewhere behind me. A dog barked in short, excited bursts. The world felt steady, safe, predictable. I had decided to take a walk because I'd been feeling restless lately. Not sick, just tired. A kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. I told myself it was stress. Work had been demanding, life had been loud, and I'd gotten very good at ignoring the subtle signals my body sent me. A flutter in my chest? Probably anxiety. The occasional lightheadedness? I must have stood up too fast. The brief waves of nausea? I skipped breakfast. There was always a reasonable explanation. That afternoon, I wore my favorite watch. It was silver with a slightly scratched face, a gift from my father years ago. I rarely took it off. It made me feel anchored somehow, grounded in time. I remember walking along the paved path, watching an elderly couple feed breadcrumbs to birds. I smiled at them, and then, just as I reached the bend near the old oak tree, the world shifted. At first, it was subtle, a faint buzzing in my ears, like distant static. I slowed my steps. The air suddenly felt thicker, heavier. I blinked hard, trying to clear my vision. The sunlight seemed too bright, almost blinding, even though moments before it had felt gentle. I told myself to sit down, but I didn't. I took another step, and that's when my heart did something strange. It didn't race, it didn't pound, it felt like it skipped, then paused, then stumbled awkwardly forward. My breath caught in my throat. A wave of dizziness washed over me so intensely that I grabbed at the air, hoping to steady myself against something that wasn't there. The laughter from the playground began to stretch and distort, as if it were underwater. My knees felt weak. My fingers tingled. I remember thinking, this is embarrassing. I'm about to faint in public. That was my last coherent thought. The ground rose up to meet me. There was no dramatic movie moment, no slow fall, just darkness swallowing everything whole. When I came back, the first thing I noticed was pressure around my wrist. Not pain, pressure, and the sound of fabric tearing. My eyes fluttered open to blurred shapes moving above me. Blue uniforms, bright sunlight fractured into streaks. Someone was kneeling beside me. I felt hands supporting my head. "Easy, easy," a voice said gently. My vision sharpened just enough to see a paramedic leaning over me. He was focused, serious. His gloved hands were working at my wrist. And then I realized what he was doing. He was cutting off my watch. The metallic snap of the band breaking felt louder than it should have. "Why are you—" I tried to speak, but my voice came out hoarse and small. He didn't answer me directly. Instead, he glanced at someone behind him and said quietly, "How long has this been going on?" The question didn't make sense. How long has what been going on? I wanted to ask, I wanted to sit up, but the world tilted violently when I tried to move. A cold sensation spread through my chest. My body felt distant, like it belongs to someone else. "I'm fine," I whispered, though I wasn't sure who I was trying to convince. The paramedic leaned closer. His expression shifted just slightly, not panic, but urgency. "Stay with me," he said. And then everything blurred again. I remember fragments after that. the sound of a stretcher unfolding, the metallic clank of ambulance doors, the faint scent of antiseptic, someone placing oxygen beneath my nose. My heart felt heavy and uneven inside my chest, like it couldn't decide on a rhythm. As the ambulance moved, I stared at the ceiling lights above me. They passed in quick intervals, flickering like silent questions. How long has this been going on? The words echoed in my mind. Had I missed something? Ignored something? There had been moments, small ones, times when I'd felt my heart flutter at night, times when I woke up gasping slightly, brushing it off as a bad dream. Even last week, I'd felt dizzy climbing the stairs at home. I laughed it off. I was only in my 30s, too young for anything serious. At least, that's what I told myself. The ambulance slowed, doors opened, and suddenly I was being wheeled through bright automatic doors into a world of white walls and hurried footsteps. Voices overlapped around me. Blood pressure dropping. Get cardiology. Family history? Family history. The phrase pierced through my foggy thoughts like a sharp needle. I tried to answer, but my mouth felt dry. My mind scrambled through old memories. Doctor visits from childhood, my mother filling out forms, the way she used to pause at certain questions before checking boxes quickly. Had there been something? A nurse leaned over me. "Do you have any known heart conditions?" "No," I croaked. And yet, doubt flickered. Because the paramedic hadn't looked surprised. He had looked like he recognized something. They rolled me into a room filled with machines that beeped in steady rhythms. Electrodes were pressed onto my chest. Cold gel smeared across my skin. I stared at the ceiling again, trying to anchor myself. Somewhere in the hallway, I heard a familiar voice. My mother. She sounded breathless, worried. "How is she?" she asked. There was a pause. And then a doctor's voice responded, low but firm. "We need to know how long she's been experiencing symptoms." Silence followed. A long, heavy silence. And in that silence, something inside me shifted. Because my mother didn't answer right away. She hesitated. And in that hesitation, I felt something colder than fear begin to take shape. I couldn't see my mother from where I was lying, but I could hear everything. When you're flat on your back in a hospital bed with wires stuck to your chest and machines measuring the rhythm of your heart, your ears become sharper than your eyes. Every breath in the hallway sounded magnified. Every shuffle of shoes against the polished floor felt deliberate. And my mother's silence, it was louder than anything else. The doctor repeated the question, gentler this time. "Ma'am, has she ever had episodes like this before? Fainting, palpitations, dizziness?" There was a pause long enough for the monitor beside me to beep twice. "Well, she used to," my mother finally said. Her voice trembled. "When she was younger." Younger? My mind tried to latch onto the word, but it slid away from me. When I was younger, I had scraped knees and crooked ponytails. I had spelling bees and birthday parties. I did not remember fainting spells. I did not remember ambulances. The curtain around my bed shifted slightly, and I saw her silhouette move closer. Her hands were clasped together in that nervous way she had whenever she was about to deliver bad news or defend herself. "What kind of episodes?" the doctor asked. "She would get tired easily," my mother said carefully. "Sometimes she'd say her heart felt funny. Once or twice, she nearly passed out at school. The pediatrician ran tests." The monitor beside me seemed to grow louder. "And?" the doctor prompted. "They said it was probably nothing serious, something she might grow out of." My mother swallowed. "They mentioned an irregular rhythm, but she was so young, they didn't seem alarmed." Irregular rhythm. The phrase hit me like a cold wave. I tried to sit up, but a nurse gently pressed me back down. "Please don't move yet. Your heart rate is unstable." Unstable? I felt like I was floating just outside my own body, listening to strangers discuss a life I apparently hadn't fully known. The doctor stepped closer to my bed, now aware that I was conscious. He was middle-aged, with calm eyes and a seriousness that made my chest tighten further. "Can you hear me?" he asked. I nodded faintly. "We're running some tests. Your heart rhythm is irregular in a way that concerns us. Have you ever been diagnosed with a cardiac condition?" "No," I whispered. My throat felt raw. "I don't remember anything." The doctor glanced at my mother. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. Fragile. Guilty. There was a diagnosis. They called it a conduction disorder, something about electrical signals in the heart misfiring. But they said it might correct itself as she grew. "And did she have follow-up appointments?" the doctor asked. My mother's silence answered before her words did. "Not consistently," she admitted. "Life was complicated. Her father had just passed. We moved. Insurance changed. And she seemed fine. She played sports. She laughed. She grew up." I felt a strange mixture of anger and sympathy twist inside me. I knew how hard those years had been for her. I knew how much she had carried alone. But right now, lying here with wires taped to my skin, I couldn't help wondering what "seemed fine" really meant. The doctor's voice grew firmer. "Based on what we're seeing, this appears to be an untreated arrhythmia that may have progressed. It's possible she's been compensating for years." Compensating? For years? Suddenly, every unexplained moment flashed in my mind. The time I nearly fainted during a college presentation and blamed it on nerves. The night I woke up gasping and told myself it was anxiety. The dizzy spells climbing stairs. The fluttering in my chest that felt like a trapped bird. I'd normalized it, laughed it off, powered through, because that's what I'd always done. My mother stepped to my bedside. I could see tears in her eyes now. "I thought it went away," she whispered. "You were so strong. You never complained." I wanted to be angry. I wanted to shout. But I didn't have the strength. And beneath the frustration was something heavier. Fear. The doctor began explaining the next steps. "We need to stabilize her rhythm. There's a chance she may require a procedure, possibly a pacemaker if the electrical pathways are failing." Pacemaker. The word felt foreign, mechanical, permanent. "I'm only 34, I murmured. He gave me a sympathetic look. Heart conditions don't always follow age rules. The room grew quiet except for the steady beeping of the monitor. My heart continued its uneven pattern, like it was struggling to find its place. Then I remembered something. "In the park," I fainted. "The paramedic had cut my watch off. Why?" The doctor glanced at the nurse. "You were bradycardic when they arrived. Your heart rate dropped dangerously low. They needed immediate access to check circulation and apply a monitor. Tight jewelry can interfere." I looked at my bare wrist. The pale indentation where my watch had rested for years was stark against my skin. It felt symbolic somehow. Time interrupted. "And what did he mean?" I asked quietly, "when he said, 'How long has this been going on?'" The doctor's expression softened. He likely recognized the pattern. Experienced paramedics see these rhythms often. It didn't look sudden. It looked chronic. Chronic. Not random, not a fluke. Something that had been building quietly inside me for years. My mother squeezed my hand. "I was going to tell you," she whispered. Every time I thought about bringing it up, you looked so healthy, so busy, so alive." I turned my head toward her slowly. "You should have told me," I said. My voice wasn't accusatory, just tired. Tears slid down her cheeks. "I know." And in that sterile hospital room, beneath the fluorescent lights, I realized a terrifying thing. The collapse at the park hadn't come out of nowhere. It had been a warning I'd been ignoring since childhood. And now the question wasn't just how long it had been going on. The question was how much damage had already been done. The next few hours blurred into a haze of tests, signatures, and hushed conversations that seemed to happen just outside my reach. I was wheeled from one department to another, the ceiling lights sliding past me in cold repetition. Each time they transferred me to a new bed or machine, someone would say, "On 3," and I would brace myself, feeling less like a person and more like something fragile being handled with caution. They performed an echocardiogram first, cold gel pressed against my chest again, a technician quietly studying the black and white movements on the screen. I tried to read her expression, but she kept her face professionally neutral. I stared at the monitor, watching my own heart move in grainy images. It looked so small, so delicate. I had never thought about it before. It had just been there, beating faithfully without applause or acknowledgement, until it didn't. After that came blood tests, more monitoring, and something called a Holter device they attached to my chest to track every irregular beat. My mother stayed close, hovering like she was afraid I might disappear if she stepped too far away. She kept apologizing in small, broken whiskers. I could see that she was replaying the past in her mind, just like I was. I remembered being 8 years old and sitting on the edge of a crinkling paper-covered exam table, a doctor with gray hair and a serious face pressing a stethoscope to my chest. I remembered my mother's tight smile. I remembered hearing words like irregular, monitor, and precaution. But children don't understand medical language, and parents sometimes translate fear into reassurance. "You're fine," she had told me back then. "You just have a quirky heartbeat." A quirky heartbeat. I almost laughed at the memory, but it caught in my throat instead. By late evening, I was back in a hospital room with dimmed lights and a steady chorus of beeps surrounding me. The cardiologist returned with a folder in his hand. He pulled up a chair instead of standing, which somehow made everything feel heavier. "We've reviewed your results," he began. "You have a condition known as sick sinus syndrome." The words felt surreal. I'd never heard of it. "It means the natural pacemaker of your heart, the sinus node, isn't consistently sending proper electrical signals. Sometimes your heart beats too slowly. Sometimes it pauses. Today, it paused long enough to cause you to lose consciousness." My chest tightened. "So I almost died?" He didn't dramatize it. He didn't soften it either. If the pause had lasted longer, yes, it could have been fatal. The room felt colder. My mother gasped quietly beside me. The doctor continued, "Given your history and today's episode, I strongly recommend a pacemaker. It would regulate your heart rhythm and prevent dangerous pauses." I stared at him. A pacemaker? A device inside my chest correcting something my own body couldn't manage anymore. It felt like crossing an invisible line between youth and vulnerability. "Is there another option?" I asked. "Medication won't fix the electrical failure," he said gently. "This is the safest and most effective treatment." I closed my eyes for a moment. I thought about the park, the sunlight, the laughter, the way the ground rushed up to meet me. I thought about the paramedic's steady hands cutting away my watch like time itself had become irrelevant. I thought about how easily it could have ended right there under that oak tree. "When?" I whispered. He said, "Tomorrow morning." The decision felt both terrifying and oddly relieving. At least there was a plan. At least there was something concrete to hold on to. After he left, the room fell quiet again. My mother sat beside me, holding my hand like she used to when I was small and afraid of thunderstorms. "I never meant to hide anything from you," she said softly. "I thought I was protecting you." "By not telling me?" I asked, not harshly, just honestly. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "You were already carrying so much after your father died. I didn't want you growing up feeling broken." I stared at the ceiling. "I don't feel broken," I said slowly. "I feel uninformed." She let out a shaky breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "I should have trusted you with the truth. And in that moment, I realized something painful but important. Secrets don't disappear just because we stop talking about them. They sit quietly in the background, waiting for the right or wrong moment to resurface. That night, I barely slept. Every irregular beat felt amplified. I became hyper-aware of the rhythm in my chest, like listening to a ticking clock in a silent room. I wondered how many times my heart had paused before, how many close calls I unknowingly survived. Around midnight, a nurse came in to check my vitals. She smiled kindly. "You gave us quite a scare today." "I scared myself," I replied faintly. She adjusted one of the leads on my chest. "You're lucky you were in a public place. If this had happened alone—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. After she left, I turned my head toward the darkened window. My reflection stared back at me, pale and tired, but undeniably alive. I thought about how fragile life really is, how we assume tomorrow is guaranteed, how we ignore whispers until they become screams. And for the first time since I collapsed, I felt something unexpected beneath the fear: gratitude. Because the park wasn't empty, because the paramedic recognized the signs, because I woke up. Morning would bring surgery, a device implanted beneath my skin, a permanent reminder that my heart needed help. But tonight, as the machines hummed softly around me, I made a quiet promise to myself. If I walked out of this hospital, I would never ignore my body again, and I would never let silence protect me from the truth. Morning arrived too quickly. Hospitals don't ease you into daylight, they flood you with it. At 6 a.m., the lights flickered on softly, and a nurse with kind eyes greeted me as if this were just another ordinary Tuesday. For her, maybe it was. For me, it felt like the day my life split into before and after. My chest felt tender from the adhesive pads, my throat dry from nerves. I hadn't told many people what was happening yet. A few close friends had texted after my mother called them the night before, but I couldn't bring myself to respond with details. How do you casually say, "I'm getting a pacemaker installed tomorrow," because my heart might randomly stop? My mother sat in the chair beside my bed, her hair pulled back messily, eyes puffy from lack of sleep. She looked older than she had 2 days ago. Fear does that to people. "Are you scared?" she asked quietly. "Yes," I admitted. There was no point to pretending. She nodded. "I am too." The honesty between us felt new, raw. Maybe it took a hospital room to strip away all the polite reassurances we'd used for years. Around 7, a nurse came to prep me. She explained everything carefully: what they would do, how long it would take, where the incision would be. Her voice was steady and comforting. She marked the upper left side of my chest with a pen. "That's where the device will sit," she said. I looked at the small mark and tried to imagine something mechanical beneath my skin, something that would quietly keep time for my heart, the way my watch once had for my day. The irony wasn't lost on me. Soon they began wheeling me down the hallway toward the procedure room. The ceiling lights passed overhead again, just like the day before, but this time I was fully aware, fully awake. Each light felt like a checkpoint. My mother walked beside the bed until they reached the double doors. "I love you," she said, gripping my hand tightly. "I love you too," I replied. And then she let go. The procedure room was colder than my hospital room, sterile, bright. Monitors surrounded the narrow table they transferred me onto. The cardiologist greeted me with a reassuring smile. "You'll be awake, but sedated," he explained. "You may feel pressure, but you shouldn't feel pain. Just breathe and stay relaxed." Easy for him to say. A nurse placed an oxygen mask over my face. Another adjusted the IV in my arm. I felt the cool rush of medication enter my bloodstream. The edges of the room began to soften, like watercolor bleeding into paper. "Think of somewhere peaceful," the nurse suggested gently. I thought of the park. Not the collapse, not the ambulance, just the soft sunlight and the sound of leaves rustling in the oak tree. I felt tugging at my chest, a strange pressure. The sensation wasn't sharp, but it was unsettling, like someone rearranging something deeply personal inside me. I focused on my breathing. In, out. In, out. At one point, I heard the doctor say, "Lead placement looks good." Lead. Placement. These were words about my heart. My heart. Time stretched strangely. I drifted in and out of awareness. There was no dramatic pain, just an awareness that something irreversible was happening. And then, eventually, I heard the words I'd been waiting for. All set. The pressure stopped. The room seemed to exhale. They wheeled me back to my hospital room, and when I blinked my eyes open fully again, my mother was there. Her relief was immediate and visible. "It's done," she whispered. I shifted slightly and felt soreness near my collarbone. My arm felt heavy, restricted. I carefully glanced down. A bandage covered the small incision site. Beneath it, a slight raised shape marked where the pacemaker now rested. I stared at it for a long time. That small bump under my skin was the difference between life and death. The doctor visited again later that afternoon. He said, "The procedure went very well. Your heart rhythm is stable. The device is functioning exactly as it should." "Will I feel it?" I asked. "You might feel occasional pacing at first, but most patients forget it's even there." Forget? I wasn't sure I ever would. That evening, when my mother stepped out to get coffee, I was alone for the first time since the collapse. The room was quiet except for the monitor, but the beeping was different now. Steady, even, reliable. I placed my fingers lightly near the bandage, careful not to press too hard. Beneath my skin, technology was keeping my heart from pausing again. It felt strange to depend on something external, but it also felt like a second chance. I thought back to the paramedic cutting my watch off my wrist. At the time, I had felt confused, vulnerable. Now I understood. My body had already stopped keeping proper time. The watch was symbolic more than anything else. Time had almost run out. And yet, here I was. When my mother returned, she sat beside me quietly. "I've been thinking," she said after a while. "There are medical records at home, old ones. I kept them in a box." I turned my head slowly. "You kept them?" She nodded. "I couldn't throw them away, even if I didn't talk about them." A complicated mixture of emotions rose inside me. Anger had softened into something more layered. Regret, love, fear, protection. "I want to see them," I said gently. She swallowed. "Okay." The truth, I realized, isn't always hidden out of malice. Sometimes it's hidden out of fear. Fear that naming something will make it real. Fear that a diagnosis becomes an identity. But ignoring it almost cost me everything. As night fell again, I lay back against the pillows, sore but stable. The steady rhythm in my chest felt unfamiliar in its consistency. No stumbles, no pauses. For the first time in years, my heart wasn't fighting to keep up. And as I drifted toward sleep, I realized something profound. My collapse in the park hadn't been the end. It had been the interruption that saved my life. I was discharged 3 days later with a small stack of paperwork, a list of restrictions, and a completely different understanding of my own body. They placed my broken watch in a clear plastic bag and handed it to me along with my other belongings. The band was cleanly cut through, the metal slightly bent where the paramedic's tool had snapped it apart. I held it in my hand for a long moment before slipping it into my purse. It felt like holding evidence. The ride home was quiet. My mother drove carefully, as if every bump in the road might undo the work that had been done inside my chest. I kept my arm still, as instructed, and stared out the window at the ordinary world continuing without pause. People crossed streets, a man argued on his phone, a teenager skateboarded down the sidewalk. Life didn't look fragile from the outside, but I knew better now. When we reached the house, I felt an unexpected wave of emotion. Walking through the front door felt surreal. 3 days earlier, I had left this place casually, telling myself I just needed some fresh air at the park. Now, I was returning with a device in my chest that would quietly monitor every beat for the rest of my life. My mother helped me settle onto the couch. She fussed over pillows, water, medication schedules. I let her. There was something healing in letting her take care of me without pretending everything was fine. That evening, she brought out the box. It was smaller than I expected, faded cardboard with old tape yellowed at the edges. She set it gently on the coffee table between us, like it contained something sacred. "I haven't opened this in years," she admitted. I nodded slowly. "Let's open it now." She peeled back the tape carefully. Inside were manila folders, old prescription slips, handwritten notes from doctors. The scent of paper and time rose into the air. My name was printed in neat capital letters across the top of one folder. I felt a strange detachment looking at it, like it belonged to someone else. I opened it. There it was, a pediatric cardiology report dated when I was 9 years old. Words I couldn't fully understand then now stood out clearly. Sinus node dysfunction suspected. Recommend continued monitoring. Risk of progression in adulthood. I felt my throat tighten. Risk of progression in adulthood. They had known. Not guaranteed, not certain, but known enough to monitor. There were follow-ups for a while, my mother said softly, as if reading my thoughts, but when your symptoms seemed to lessen, they said we could space them out. "And then?" I asked. She looked down at her hands. "Then life happened. We moved twice. Insurance changed. You seemed fine. You wanted to try out for track in high school, and you did so well. I didn't want to limit you." The word limit lingered in the air. "I didn't want to feel different," I admitted quietly. "If I had known, maybe I would have been more careful, or maybe I would have been scared all the time." She reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. "I didn't want fear to shape your childhood." I studied her face, the lines near her eyes, the weight she had carried alone after my father died. She had been a single parent trying to protect her child from a world that already felt unstable. "I understand why you thought you were protecting me, but not knowing didn't protect me. It just delayed the truth." Tears filled her eyes again, but this time there was less panic in them, more acceptance. "I know," she whispered. We spent hours going through the rest of the documents, test results showing minor irregularities, notes about episodes of lightheadedness, recommendations for long-term observation. None of it had been dramatic. None of it had screamed emergency. It was the kind of condition that sits quietly in the background until one day it doesn't. As I flipped through the final page, a memory surfaced with startling clarity. I was 12, standing in the kitchen, telling my mother that my heart felt like it was flipping. She had placed her hand over my chest and waited with me until it passed. I remember her saying, "It's probably just growing pains." I realized then that she likely had been more afraid than she let on. Later that night, after she went to bed, I sat alone with the box of records and my broken watch beside it. I picked up the watch again, running my thumb over the severed band. Time had been cut short that day in the park, but it had also been reset. The cardiologist had scheduled a follow-up appointment in 2 weeks. I would have regular device checks, adjustments, monitoring. The pacemaker would log every irregular beat. There would be no more guessing. Part of me felt relieved. Another part felt exposed.
I couldn't hide from my own body anymore. The next morning, I decided to take a slow walk around the neighborhood. The doctor had encouraged gentle movement. My arm was still stiff, but manageable. The air felt different against my skin. Or maybe I felt different inside it. I walked carefully, hyper-aware of each breath, each step. My heart beat steadily beneath the bandage. For the first time in years, it wasn't stumbling. As I passed a small group of children playing in a yard, I paused. Their laughter sounded exactly like it had at the park. Carefree, untouched by the awareness of how quickly things can change. I didn't feel jealous. I felt grateful. Grateful that I collapsed in public instead of alone at home. Grateful that a paramedic recognized the signs. Grateful that my mother kept those records, even if she hadn't shared them. Because in the end, the truth had caught up with me anyway. But it had caught me before it was too late. And as I continued walking, slower but steadier than before, I realized something else. My heart had always been different. Now, instead of fearing that difference, I was finally learning how to live with it.
2 weeks passed and a strange rhythm of adjustment. Physically, I was healing well. The incision site itched more than it hurt, which the nurse had warned me about. The bruising faded from deep purple to yellow, and the small, raised outline of the pacemaker beneath my skin became less alarming to look at. Emotionally, though, I was still catching up to what had happened. At night, I would lie in bed with my hand resting lightly over my collarbone, feeling the steady beat beneath. Not the pacemaker itself, I couldn't feel it working, but the reassurance of consistency. It was like living with a quiet guardian, invisible, tireless. The follow-up appointment arrived sooner than I expected. My mother offered to come with me, but I declined gently. This time, I needed to sit in that room alone, not out of anger, not out of distance, but because this was my body, my responsibility now. The cardiology clinic felt less intimidating than the emergency room. Softer lighting, fewer rushing footsteps. A technician led me into a small room and placed a wand-like device over the area where the pacemaker rested. On the screen, lines and numbers appeared instantly. "This will download the data from your device," she explained. Download. It amazed me that my heart's rhythm was now stored like files on a computer. She studied the screen quietly, then smiled. "Everything looks stable. No dangerous pauses since implantation." Relief washed through me so quickly that I hadn't realized how tense I'd been until that moment. When the cardiologist came in, he reviewed the results with me. "Your heart is responding very well," he said. "The pacemaker has already corrected several minor slowdowns that could have progressed." "So it's already prevented something?" I asked. "Yes," he said plainly. "You likely would have experienced more fainting episodes without it." A chill ran down my spine. "How long do you think this has been worsening?" I asked. He glanced at the data again. "Given the severity of the pause you experienced at the park, I suspect progression over the last few years. Sometimes these conditions are quiet until they aren't." I nodded slowly. There was something both terrifying and comforting about that statement. Terrifying because it meant I had been walking around unaware of a ticking clock inside me. Comforting because now the clock was regulated. On the drive home, I decided to stop at the park. I hadn't told anyone I was going. I just felt drawn to it, like I needed to reclaim something. The oak tree stood exactly where it had before, tall and indifferent to human drama. Children played near the swings, a woman jogged past with headphones in. Life continued in its familiar loops. I walked slowly toward the bend in the path where I had collapsed. My chest tightened, not physically, but emotionally. I could almost see it in my mind, the dizziness, the blur, the sudden darkness. I stood in that exact spot and closed my eyes. For a moment, I allowed myself to feel the fear I hadn't fully processed that day. The vulnerability of losing control in public, the helplessness of waking up surrounded by strangers. Then, I opened my eyes again, and instead of fear, I saw something else. Intervention. If I had collapsed alone at home, no one would have found me quickly. If I had been driving, the consequences could have been catastrophic. If I had brushed off that dizzy spell and gone straight back to work instead of walking in the park, I might not have gotten help in time. The park hadn't been random. It had been mercy. I sat down on a nearby bench and watched the sunlight filter through the leaves. My hand instinctively went to my wrist, expecting the familiar weight of my watch. It wasn't there. I had taken the broken watch to a jeweler earlier that week. He had examined it and told me the band could be repaired, but the original cut would always be faintly visible if you looked closely. I told him to fix it anyway. Scars don't disappear completely. They become part of the story. As I sat there, I noticed a man walking toward me. My heart skipped, not irregularly, just with recognition. It was him, the paramedic. He was off duty, dressed casually, but I recognized his face instantly. There are certain people you never forget, the ones who see you at your most fragile. He hesitated when he noticed me staring, then his expression shifted. "You were at the park a couple weeks ago," he said cautiously. "Yes," I replied, standing carefully. "You cut my watch off." A faint smile crossed his face. "Yeah, sorry about that." "Don't be," I said softly. "You saved my life." He shook his head slightly. "Your heart gave us a pretty clear warning. We just responded." I studied him for a moment. "You asked how long it had been going on." He nodded. "Your rhythm didn't look sudden. It looked chronic. We're trained to recognize patterns." I swallowed. "You were right." He glanced at my chest subtly. "Pacemaker?" "Yes." He smiled again, more fully this time. "Good. That's a strong fix." We stood there in companionable silence for a moment. "I almost didn't come to the park that day," I admitted. "I almost stayed home." Funny how life works. Sometimes the collapse is the rescue. His words settled deep inside me. Sometimes the collapse is the rescue. After he walked away, I remained on the bench for a while longer. I watched people pass by, unaware of how thin the line can be between ordinary and irreversible. I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I felt awake. The collapse had stripped away my illusions of invincibility. It had forced uncomfortable conversations. It had exposed old decisions made from love but rooted in fear. But it had also given me something else, a second rhythm, one that reminded me, with every steady beat, that life is not something to coast through blindly. It is something to pay attention to. As I stood up to leave the park, I made another quiet promise. I would not let this experience shrink my life. I would let it deepen it. Healing isn't dramatic. It doesn't arrive with music swelling in the background or a sudden transformation in the mirror. It comes quietly, in small permissions. The first time I lifted my arm without wincing. The first full night of uninterrupted sleep. The first morning I woke up and didn't immediately check my pulse. A month after the surgery, life began to resemble something close to normal again. I returned to work part-time at first. My coworkers greeted me with careful smiles, as if I were made of glass. I understood their caution. I had felt fragile too. But something unexpected happened during those early days back. I found myself speaking more honestly than I ever had before. When a colleague asked how I was doing, instead of saying, "Fine," I said, "I had a heart condition I didn't know about. It almost killed me." The words were heavy, but they felt true, and each time I said them, the experience became less like a secret and more like a story I owned. One afternoon, while reorganizing old emails at my desk, I stumbled across a draft I had written months before. It was a message to my mother that I had never sent. I had been frustrated about something unrelated at the time, missed boundaries, old patterns, but reading it now, I realized how much of our dynamic had been shaped by unspoken fear. We had both been pretending for years. That evening, I invited her over for dinner, not out of obligation, not because I needed her to fix anything, but because I wanted to reset something between us. She arrived with a small bag in her hand. When she sat down at the table, she slid it toward me. "I picked this up yesterday," she said. Inside the bag was my repaired watch. The jeweler had polished the metal and replaced the band. It looked almost new. Almost. If you tilted it just right under the light, you could see a faint line where it had once been cut. "It's beautiful," I said softly. "I know it's just a watch," she said, "but I thought maybe you could wear it again." I fastened it carefully around my wrist. The familiar weight felt different now, lighter somehow. It's not just a watch, it's a reminder. We ate dinner slowly, talking about ordinary things at first, work, groceries, the neighbor's new fence. But eventually the conversation circled back to the hospital. "I keep replaying that day," she admitted, "wondering if I should have told you sooner, if I could have prevented it." I set my fork down. "Maybe," I said honestly, "but maybe I also needed to face it on my own terms." She looked confused. "If you had told me when I was younger, I might have lived cautiously, afraid of every flutter, afraid to push myself. I don't know who I would have become." She was quiet. "I'm not saying it was right," I added gently, "but I don't think either of us were trying to hurt the other. We were just trying to survive." Her shoulders relaxed slightly. "I was afraid you'd blame me forever," she whispered. "I was angry," I admitted, "but anger fades when you realize you're still here." Still here. Those two words carried more weight than any accusation ever could. After dinner, we sat on the porch together as the sun dipped low. The air was cool and steady. I could feel my heart beating evenly beneath my collarbone. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "your father had a cousin who died young. They said it was his heart. I always wondered if there was something genetic." The statement landed quietly but significantly. "Why didn't you ever mention that?" I asked. She sighed. "Because it felt like adding fuel to a fire I didn't want to light." I nodded slowly. Avoidance had been our family's coping mechanism, silence mistaken for strength. But silence doesn't stop biology. Over the next few weeks, I began researching more about sick sinus syndrome. I learned about its progression, its unpredictability, its genetic links. I scheduled an appointment with a genetic counselor, not out of panic, but out of awareness. Knowledge, I was discovering, wasn't something to fear. It was something to use. One afternoon, while cleaning out an old drawer, I found a photo of myself at 10. I was grinning wide, hair messy, holding a soccer trophy. I looked unstoppable. I studied that child's face carefully. She had no idea her heart sometimes hesitated. She had no idea that decades later she would collapse under an oak tree and wake up to strangers saving her life. But she also had no idea how strong she was. I placed the photo on my bedside table. The collapse had felt like a failure at first, like my body had betrayed me in public. Now I saw it differently. It wasn't betrayal, it was exposure. My heart had been whispering for years. I just had been too busy to listen, and maybe my mother had been too afraid. But fear doesn't define the ending of a story. Awareness does. As I prepared for bed that night, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The faint outline of the pacemaker was visible beneath my skin, if you knew where to look. It didn't make me feel weak. It made me feel repaired. Not fixed in a way that erased the past, but supported in a way that honored it. The park, the collapse, the watch, the silence, the surgery,
They were no longer separate events. They were chapters. And for the first time since that Sunday afternoon, I felt something settle deep within me. Not just survival, but acceptance.
About 3 months after the collapse, I was invited to speak at a small wellness seminar hosted by a friend from work. She had heard my story and thought it might help others. My first instinct was to decline. I wasn't a doctor, I wasn't an expert, I was just someone whose heart had malfunctioned in public. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that silence had nearly cost me my life once. I didn't want it to cost someone else theirs. The seminar was held in a modest community center room with folding chairs and a projector screen. Nothing glamorous. About 20 people attended, most of them middle-aged, a few younger. Some looked curious, others looked tired in that way people do when they've been ignoring their own health. When it was my turn to speak, my hands trembled slightly, not from irregular rhythm, but from vulnerability. I almost died at the park, I began plainly. The room went quiet immediately. I felt dizzy. I told myself it was nothing. I took another step, and then I woke up to a paramedic cutting my watch off my wrist. I saw eyes widen, bodies lean forward. I had a heart condition I didn't know about, or maybe I did know once and it got buried under time and good intentions. I spoke about the childhood diagnosis, the follow-ups that faded, the way small symptoms become background noise when life gets busy. I described the hospital lights, the surgery, the weight of the pacemaker under my skin. But more than anything, I talked about listening. Your body whispers before it screams, I said. Mine whispered for years. Fatigue, dizziness, fluttering. I explained it all away. A woman in the front row wiped her eyes quietly. After I finished, there was a long pause before the applause came. Not loud or dramatic, just steady and sincere. During the question period, a man raised his hand. He asked carefully, "Do you blame your mother?" It was a fair question. I did, I answered honestly, for a while, but I realized something. She wasn't hiding the truth to hurt me. She was hiding it because she was afraid. I let that settle. Fear makes people do quiet things. Sometimes it makes them stay silent, but silence doesn't stop reality. After the seminar, several people approached me privately. One woman said she'd been ignoring chest discomfort for months because she didn't want to seem dramatic. Another admitted she'd stopped attending follow-up appointments after a minor diagnosis years ago because she felt fine. I saw myself in each of them. That night, as I drove home, I felt something I hadn't expected: purpose. Not because I had survived something tragic, but because surviving it had given me clarity. The collapse was no longer just a personal crisis, it was a turning point. A week later, I returned to the park again, this time not to reclaim it, but to sit with it. I wore my repaired watch. I sat on the same bench where I had spoken to the paramedic weeks earlier. The oak tree's leaves were beginning to change color now, hints of gold creeping in. Time had moved forward. I closed my eyes and listened. Children laughing, wind through branches, a distant dog barking. My own breath, steady and even. I placed my fingers lightly near the pacemaker site. Beneath it, my heart beat with quiet reliability. It struck me then how close everything had come to ending without warning. No dramatic goodbye, no final words, just a body shutting down beneath a tree on a Sunday afternoon. And yet, here I was, alive, aware, different. I thought about the question the paramedic had asked: how long has this been going on? Back then, it felt accusatory. Now, it felt like an invitation. How long had I been ignoring myself? How long had I minimized symptoms? How long had my family avoided difficult conversations? Long enough, but not forever. As I opened my eyes, I noticed a young woman walking slowly along the path.
She paused suddenly, placing her hands on a nearby bench as if steadying herself. For a brief moment, my breath caught. She regained her balance quickly and continued walking. I stood up instinctively, ready to help if needed. My heart pounded, not irregularly, but urgently. She waved, embarrassed. "I'm okay," she called out lightly. I nodded, but I didn't sit back down immediately, because now I knew how quickly okay can shift. Eventually, I returned to the bench, but something inside me had shifted again. Survival had changed me. It had made me less dismissive, less impatient, more attentive. As the sun dipped lower, I looked at my watch. The repaired band gleamed softly. The faint scar where it had been cut caught the light. I realized then that my life would always be divided into two parts, before the collapse and after. Before, I moved quickly, confidently, certain that tomorrow was automatic. After, I moved intentionally, gratefully, aware that tomorrow is a privilege. The collapse had not weakened me, it had introduced me to my own mortality in a way that demanded honesty. And honesty, I was learning, is a kind of strength. As I stood to leave the park once more, I felt no fear, only understanding. The day I fainted under that oak tree was not the day my heart failed. It was the day I finally started listening to it.
It has been a year now since the afternoon my body gave out beneath that oak tree. A full circle of seasons. The leaves that were green that day have turned gold, fallen, grown back, and shifted again. Time didn't stop when my heart did. It kept moving, quietly, steadily, just like it always does. I sometimes think about how thin the line was between this version of my life and a very different ending. A few more seconds without oxygen, a quieter park, a delayed ambulance. It doesn't take much for a story to close before we're ready, but mine didn't, and that has changed everything. The pacemaker has become less of a foreign object and more of a companion. I go in every few months to have it checked. The technician places the wand over my chest, downloads the data, and tells me how many times it intervened quietly without my knowledge. Each time I feel a strange sense of awe. There are moments I would never have known were dangerous, moments where my heart hesitated and the device stepped in without drama. No collapse, no ambulance, no oak tree, just correction. Sometimes I imagine all the silent rescues happening inside me daily. It humbles me. My relationship with my mother has shifted too, not in a dramatic, cinematic way. There was no tearful shouting match or grand apology speech. Instead, there have been conversations, slow ones, honest ones. We talk about fear now instead of pretending it doesn't exist. She has admitted that after my father died, she was terrified of losing anyone else. That fear made her minimize what doctors told her, made her convince herself that if she didn't dwell on the diagnosis, it would dissolve. I thought if I kept you focused on living, the illness wouldn't follow, she told me once. I understand that now, but I also understand something else. Love without truth can still cause harm, and truth without love can feel like abandonment. The balance matters. Last week, we went back to the park together for the first time. She had avoided it all year. I think she associated it with failure, with almost losing me. We walked slowly along the same paved path. The oak tree stood tall as ever. "This is where it happened," I said quietly. She looked at the ground for a moment, then up at me. "And this is where you survived." That reframing stayed with me. Not where I collapsed, where I survived. We sat on a bench nearby, and I told her something I hadn't said out loud before. "I don't wish it hadn't happened," I admitted. She turned sharply. "You don't?" I shook my head. "I don't wish I'd almost died, but I don't wish I was still unaware either. I was living like my body was indestructible. I was ignoring signs. I was dismissing myself. She was quiet, listening. The collapse forced me to face what had been quietly building for years. It forced us to talk. It forced me to slow down. She reached for my hand. "I'm grateful you're here," she whispered. "So am I said. Later that evening, alone in my room, I took off my watch and placed it on the nightstand beside the childhood photo I keep there now. The 10-year-old girl with the soccer trophy smiles at me every night before I sleep. She didn't know she had a faulty sinus node. She didn't know that decades later a device would help her heart keep time. But she also didn't know how strong she would become. I think about the paramedic sometimes, the way he calmly cut through metal to reach my pulse, the question he asked that seemed so simple but carried so much weight. How long has this been going on? It's a question that extends beyond medicine. How long have we been ignoring ourselves? How long have we stayed silent about discomfort? How long have we chosen convenience over awareness? For me, it was years, but the beauty of survival is this: it offers revision. I can't go back and rewrite my childhood. I can't change the decisions made out of fear, but I can choose differently now. I listen when my body whispers. I go to follow-up appointments. I ask questions. I tell the truth even when it feels uncomfortable. The scar beneath my collarbone has faded to a thin, pale line. If you didn't know where to look, you might miss it entirely, but I know it's there, a quiet mark of interruption and intervention. Sometimes people ask if I feel limited. I don't. I feel informed. There's a difference. Before the collapse, I assumed I had endless time. After the collapse, I understand that time is generous, but not guaranteed. And strangely, that knowledge hasn't made me anxious. It's made me present. When I walk through the park now, I notice details I once rushed past: the way sunlight filters differently through each season, the rhythm of footsteps against pavement, the steady beat inside my chest, supported but still mine. The day I fainted felt like an ending, but it wasn't. It was a correction, a pause long enough to wake me up before the silence became permanent. If there's anything I've learned, it's this: our bodies are not enemies, they are messengers, and ignoring them doesn't make us strong, it just delays the conversation. That Sunday afternoon under the oak tree could have been my last chapter. Instead, it became the page where I finally started paying attention, and every steady beat since then feels like a gift I will never take for granted again.